Hey everyone, and welcome back to a new video. In a few recent videos, I tackled some issues around ISO that not everyone agreed with. Now I'm going to do it again and maybe get even more people to disagree with me. When buying a new camera, one of the big decisions we need to make is around the megapixel count of the camera. It's a key driver of the price and the features, and so of course we need to understand the pros and the cons. Now likely you've heard the widely believed view that low megapixel cameras have better image quality and noise performance than high megapixel cameras. But is this true? In this video, I'll show you what's actually going on, and I'll warn you the result is going against the grain. Don't forget to stay for my bonus tip, where I'll show you how to get the ultimate image quality in low light, high ISO situations like in these photos. My name is Simon D'Entremont and I'm a professional nature and wildlife photographer living in Eastern Canada. I make weekly videos giving you photo tips or taking you behind the scenes for nature photography. Subscribe if you want to see more. So the heart of the matter here is that when it comes to cameras and how many megapixels you have, it's widely believed that high megapixel cameras have more detailed, but low megapixel cameras have an advantage with less noise, better high ISO performance, and better image quality. But is this true? To keep this fair, it's important to compare two cameras from the same generation to rule out technology changes and remove any variables. I'm going to compare the Canon R5 at 45 megapixels and the Canon R6 at 20 megapixels. Which both came out at the same time. And remember, we're talking image quality here apart from resolution, which is another matter. So what makes up better image quality? Often this is attributed to better noise performance, more faithful color reproduction, and greater dynamic range. So let's look at the standard thinking on this and why people believe this. In large part, it's because if you lower the megapixel count on a sensor and keep its physical dimensions, each pixel is larger. What benefits do these bigger pixels bring? In this video, I'm not going to repeat the differences between shot noise and read noise. I did that in the last video, which you can check out here. But in general, larger pixels, really called photosites, can collect more photons and improve what's called the signal to noise ratio. That means that at the pixel level, the image looks cleaner. Note that I said at the pixel level. This is a key caveat in this discussion. Let's look at two photos shot at ISO 12800 on my Canon R5 and Canon R6 in Lightroom. And right here, we're going to unravel one of the reasons why people say low megapixel cameras have much less noise. Many image processing programs like Lightroom have a feature that when you zoom in on an image, it zooms in a different amount based on the megapixel count of the camera. When we zoom into 100%, which is a 1-to-1 ratio of pixels, we see that the R5 image with more megapixels is zoomed in more. One of the features of noise is that the more you zoom in, the worse it looks. So in this comparison, the low megapixel R6 looks less noisy. But to make this a fair comparison, we need to zoom in the same amount as we would in real life. As you can see, the R6 with the lower megapixel count looks a bit cleaner, even if the scale is the same. So the advantage goes to the R6, but a bit less than if we were zoomed into different amounts like earlier. Now here's the rub. I can add some noise reduction to the higher megapixel R5 and get the noise level down to that of the R6 and still have more detail left behind. Someone might say, well, yeah, you can do that to the R6 too and get it even cleaner. You can, but the image would fall way behind in detail. Hey, just a quick reminder that if you're watching this around Labor Day weekend, we've got a sale with $100 US off my wildlife photography course. If you want to take photos like this, and this, check it out in the comments below. So when it comes to noise, the lower megapixel camera does indeed have less noise at the pixel level, but that doesn't give it an advantage over the R5. The R5 can equal its performance in real-world use and still have more detail. Now, what about color fidelity and dynamic range, two attributes that are often seen as important in image quality? While this has been debated to death and people still don't agree, my experience is that this is more a factor of manufacturer technology and the generation of your technology, meaning how new is your camera. Manufacturing sensors with photosites that can collect more light before becoming full and overexposed, called the full well depth, and reproducing colors more accurately and faithfully is more a technology choice by manufacturers than physical limitations of the photo site size. If we compare the large pixel king in modern full-frame cameras, the 12 megapixel Sony a7S III, monster 8.4 micron pixels, with the 61 megapixel A7R5. Much smaller 3.8 micron pixels here on photons2photos.net. The dynamic range is about the same, with the 61 megapixel camera actually outperforming the 12 megapixel camera at lower ISOs. So in short, when it comes to photography, improving image quality by buying a lower megapixel camera isn't really a thing. If you want better low light performance and image quality, by far getting a newer generation sensor, or even better, getting a larger sensor will give you way more benefit than choosing amongst pixel sizes. Now what about video? Are lower megapixel cameras with larger pixels an advantage? In video, it turns out that lower megapixel cameras evens up the battle a bit. Now why is this? One, in video you're rarely cropping, or at least not cropping as much as in photography. As such, part of the advantage of high megapixel cameras is lost. Two, we tend to use less noise reduction in video compared to photos. So having more detailed images from a high megapixel camera that we can just reduce the noise on to match the high ISO performance of lower megapixel cameras is partially negated. Third, to meet the dimensions of 4K video, many high megapixel cameras are much larger than 4K in dimensions and use things like line skipping, where they only use every second line of pixels in creating an image, wasting some of the resolution. Fourth, lower megapixel cameras can read out the sensor faster as they have less data to transmit, so they can avoid artifacts like rolling shutter. And fifth, less data to transmit and store also leads to less heat and less overheating. So in video, lower megapixel cameras like the Sony a7S III 12 megapixel video-centric camera are indeed helpful and a great idea. But while it does have very, very good image quality, many of the benefits are also around workflow and usability. And I promised you a bonus tip. Sometimes we want to take photos in very dark scenarios where we're forced to use very high ISOs. If our subject isn't moving, we can just take longer exposures at lower ISOs. But for something like the Milky Way that's moving, you need a bit more shutter speed, so higher ISOs. When I shoot Milky Way photography, I have to limit my shots to something like 13 or 15 seconds and often use ISO 3200. What could I do to clean up these images? You can take several images and stack them. In Photoshop, we can hit File, Scripts, Load Files into Stack, and then select Automatically Align Source Images. For Milky Way shots in particular, I use a free program called Sequitur. I think it's PC only. There's a Mac equivalent that you can buy called Starry Landscape Stacker. It separates the sky from the land, stacks the sky, stacks the land, and then puts them back together. Now why does this work? It's because we're reinforcing where there was actually light and photons, which appear in every photo, but averaging out the noise, which varies by photo. Here's one frame compared to a stack of 12. How many should you stack? I find that 8 gives some decent benefit, but more than 20 you stop seeing much improvement. So around 10 to 12 is my usual number. So there are lots of good reasons to get a lower megapixel camera for photography. You get smaller files. These smaller files leads to faster workflow. They have less rolling shutter if you use the electronic shutter or in video mode. They can enable a faster frame rate or deeper buffer due to the smaller files. And they're usually cheaper. The summary of this is that low megapixel cameras indeed have an attribute of having lower noise and clean images, but it wouldn't be correct to call it an advantage, as higher megapixel cameras can duplicate their results and sometimes still get even more detail. Now this doesn't mean you shouldn't buy one. I have a 20 megapixel Canon R6 and I also own the Canon R8 and I love them. Just make sure if you get one, you're getting it for the right reasons. If you really want better image quality and lower noise, get a more modern sensor or a larger sensor, which maybe can be the topic for another video. But if you do lots of video, a low megapixel camera can be a great asset and provides nice benefits and beautiful files straight out of the camera with little fussing, plus provides lots of other benefits like low heat and low rolling shutter. By the way, if you want to get my ebook on shooting in backlit situations, go to my website and join my mailing list and you can download it for free. There's a link below. If you found this video deserving, give it a like and YouTube will show it to even more photographers, helping them grow and learn new skills. But remember, choosing the right megapixel camera is not going to make you a better photographer. Go out there and get some photos. I hope you can go out and put this info to good use the next time you're buying a camera and help make sure you're getting the right tool for the right job. I know you can do it.